Buonasera a tutti, come siamo con italiani cominciamo con una parola in italiano. السلام عليكم. اليوم نستقبل معالي سفيرة إيطاليا هنا في مملكة البحرين، ونشكر معالي الشيخة مي اللي استضافت أستاذ من أشهر الأساتذة الإيطاليين في مجال التراث الثقافي ستيفانو دي كارو. في البداية نطلب من سعادة السفيرة تعطينا كلمة في البداية. So I want to ask Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Italy to Bahrain, to say a few words. Please.
Grazie, Professor Munir. Grazie mille.
Prego.
Good evening, Excellencies, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank the President of the Sheikh Ibrahim bin Mohammed Al Khalifa Center for Culture and Research, Sheikh Amay bin Mohammed Al Khalifa. Thank you very much, Sheikh Amay. For her hospitality, for her precious support in organizing this event, and extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for your presence tonight. We are delighted to be hosted today in this beautiful space for such a significant occasion. Tonight's lecture, The Influence of Pompeii on the Modern Culture by Dr. Stefano De Caro, will take us on a journey into the history of the incredible city of Pompeii and its lasting impact on the arts and culture of modern time. Dr. De Caro's profound contributions within the Italian Ministry of Culture and his long dedication to Pompeii's legacy have been fundamental in shaping the narrative of this historically significant site. Today, Pompeii stands proudly as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and remains one of Italy's most beloved tourist attractions, a testament to its enduring cultural impact. The lecture is not only an incredible opportunity to pay homage to Italian historical heritage through the history of Pompeii, but it is also an important occasion to focus on the impact history could have on art, music, and literature. Pompeii did not only provide us with an incredible history, but it also gifted us with a variety of timeless masterpieces that Dr. De Caro will illustrate us. Thank you very much. Without any further delay, thank you, Professor Munir. I leave the floor to Professor Munir, and I leave the floor to Dr. Stefano De Caro, and I wish you, all of you, a pleasant evening. Thank you, Shukran. Grazie, Professor.
Grazie, Ambasciatore. So I think it was very easy to present Dr. Stefano De Caro. First of all, he is a friend since, I think,
70s.
in the 70s, you see. I met him a long time ago when he was director of the National Museum Napoli. We were meeting at many occasions at UNESCO in Paris, exhibition that he was organizing. Then he had a fantastic career as an archaeologist, excavating in Pompeii, excavating in Herculanum, and coming to a number of meetings that we were having at UNESCO during my period there. Then we had a very strong relationship when I was in Rome, director of ICROM, and he was member of the Council of ICROM. So we were meeting regularly, And then when I left ICROM, he was my successor as Director General of ICROM. So what can I say about him? I think he has a very, very sound knowledge about cultural heritage in general, but mainly cultural heritage of Italy, and on Paestum, on Pompeii, on Herculanum, and other sites. And I think today he's going to show you, of course, Pompeii needs hours and hours, but in 1 hour, he is capable to give you the sense of what is Pompeii, what it means, what are the values of what has been discovered in Pompeii, and what we, at modern time, what we can learn in our modern culture from Pompeii. Stefano, you have the floor.
Thank you, Munir. Thanks, His Excellency Ambassador. Thanks to the Sheikh Ibrahim Center, because it was a real pleasure to have the possibility to come here for giving this, not a lecture, it's just thinking about what Pompeii is significant for us in our time. You see, the modernity is shown by the title, Mickey Mouse in Pompeii. The reason that has made Pompeii the most famous archaeological site in the world, perhaps together with the pyramids, the Acropolis of Athens, the Great Wall of China, is certainly the exceptional nature of the fate of a city suddenly frozen in its life by a dramatic event such as the eruption of Vesuvius, the volcano, in 79 AD, and transformed it into a document of a great world civilization as it was the Roman Empire. Pompeii was not very important in the moment during the Roman Empire. It was important 2 centuries before, but is the first Roman town that we can see as it was, entire, complete. Alongside this constitutive reason, so to say, there are some other reasons not less important. Among these, the circumstance that Pompeii, gathered today with Herculaneum, Oplontis, and Stabie in a single UNESCO World Heritage Site, has been the first archaeological excavation organized as a scientific enterprise. There were excavations in Rome a long time before. The popes excavated to search statues and so on. But this was the first time that an excavation was started for scientific reasons and is continuing since then. Thus rapidly becoming the very emblem of the archaeology, even far beyond the scope of the first antiquarians that started the enterprise. Today, we know many other sites buried by volcanoes around the world, in many of which archaeological research has been developed. Thus, the Minoan age, the site of Akrotiri, Thera, in Greece, in the Greek island of Thera, or the Mayan site in El Salvador, destroyed by the volcano Ilopango in 3rd century AD, or the site of the key Vikings in Iceland, just to quote few of them. In all these cases, and in many others, the name of Pompeii was unavoidably evoked. Every time, this is the new Pompeii, the Pompeii of the Viking and so on. Just to give you an example not very known, the excavation in 2010 of the Medina Azara in Spain was presented as an Arabic Pompeii, historic discovery in Andalusia. You see the frontispiece of the Ricardo Velázquez Bosco, an Arabic Pompeii, historic discovery. So it was the idea that every important excavation is a new Pompeii, is compared to Pompeii. The dimension of Pompeii as a cultural phenomenon has, since some decades, exceeded even the original boundaries of the Western culture. And this is the basis of the enormous success that the site enjoys all over the world. Now, there are about 3 million visitors last year. Having had for some years the privilege to work in Pompeii, mostly in the difficult days of the earthquake that hit the city, the ancient city in 1980-1981, I felt since the first days of my work there the duty not only to study and conserve the material structure of the site, but also to preserve and disseminate its broader cultural values, both locally and internationally. The aim of this presentation will be, on the same line, trying to illustrate, certainly too quickly due to the short time we have, some examples of how Pompeii values have been elaborated and disseminated by generations of artists and intellectuals from the 18th century up to now. To those who could wish to know more about this topic, I suggest to go to this book, a recent book, published in 2015, Pompeii's Ashes, the reception of the cities buried by Vesuvius in literature, music, and drama, written by the eminent Dutch scholar, Professor Eric Moorman. Much before the beginning of the excavation, the first stone of the Pompeii myth was led by 2 letters that Pliny the Younger, a writer who flourished during the reign of Emperor Trajan, we are in 2nd century AD, wrote to his friend Tacitus, in which he described, with plenty of details, the eruption of Vesuvius. So abundant in details that also today geologists, volcanologists speak of a Plinian type of eruption to describe this kind of eruption. In truth, he saw the eruption, Pliny the Younger saw the eruption only from the Misenum villa, distant about 20 miles. The villa was of his uncle, who was then the commander of the Roman fleet stationed in Misenum, and he was also a famous Roman encyclopedic scientist, author of the Naturalis Historia, which is the largest encyclopedia that we have of the ancient world. It's much more famous, Pliny the Old than the Pliny the Young. In fact, the main reason for Pliny the Young to write the letters was for the nephew to remember the heroic circumstances of the death of his uncle, dead during the catastrophe, after he tried to bring help with the ships under his command to the endangered population of the cities under the volcano. An example of the fortune of this episode among posterity is this painting by the Swiss neoclassical painter Angelica Kaufmann, which shows Pliny the Younger and his mother in Misenum during the eruption of Vesuvius, a painting of 1785. And you see, look, there is the volcano over there, there is our uncle there. An evidence of the celebrity for centuries after of the catastrophe accompanied the memory of the lost cities, and this testimony is the Tabula Peutingeriana, which is a famous Roman map of Italy dated in 3rd century AD, but yet containing the names of the cities destroyed by Vesuvius. You see, you have Pompeii, you have Herculaneum, you have Plontis, but these cities did not exist anymore. It was just a memory. Besides the Pliny's letter, many other classical writers spoke of the eruption. So we have Martial, Dio Cassius, Marcus Aurelius, and as well as the Christian apologetists like Tertullian. And for these people of Christian faith, Pompeii was destroyed as a punition because they were pagan. It was the polemic between Christians and pagans. Thus, the author of the European Intelligentsia, who studied classical language and literature, received and disseminated the myth of the lost cities. Among them, there were the novelist Giovanni Boccaccio, who in the comedy of the Florentine Nymph, 1341, here we have a scene of the comedy, and the Antiquarium Flavio Biondo, author of the Roma Restaurata and Italy Illustrated of 1474. Few years after, Flavio Biondo, a noted writer, Jacopo Sannazzaro, in his poem Arcadia of 1505, introduced a tale that some nymph give to a storyteller. It was a time when, with stormy flames and ashes, the Vesuvius covered all the surrounding villages, just as it is clearly testified to whoever is looking by the liquefied and the burnt stones, under which we will ever believe that the most noble peoples and villas and cities are buried. And imagining to see a still standing city, he says, this one that we see ahead, which without any doubt was once a famous city in your countries called Pompeii, irrigated by the waves of the very cold Sarno River, was immediately swallowed up by the earth. And by saying these words, we arrived very close to the city that you said, of which the towers and the houses and the theaters and the temples could be discerned almost intact. It was a dream of poets. Nobody could see really this, but the poet imagined to see. It was a poetical vision in reality. On the field, the cities were lying under meters of volcanic soils, 20 meters for Herculanum, 6 or 7 for Pompeii. And common people had totally lost the perception that under the vegetation of the cultivated countryside there were walls and houses. Besides poets, few learned writers between 16th and 17th and 18th centuries began developing erudite discussion on the identification of on the site of Pompeii. Where is Pompeii? Where is Stabia? It was completely lost for people. Starting from pieces of evidence, such as a Latin inscription, certainly from Maintenance Pompeii, which was reused in a church, or other evidence was the local names Civita, the city, given to a neighborhood in the countryside of Pompeii, or the name Scudella, bowl, which was given by the local peasant to the site where the amphitheater of Pompeii lay. And Scudella was because of the central depression, the ashes accumulated in the arena has given like a small valley, and so it was the Scudella site. But it was a local perception. No one in the high classes of the society really cared of these issues. An example of this indifference is the silence that accompanied the first real discovery of the ruins of Pompeii by the Swiss architect Domenico Fontana, which was a clever man. He worked in Rome for the popes for many, many years, and who about 1592, opening a canal to bring the water from the river Sarno to some new mills in Torre Annunziata on the coast near Pompeii, cut over 1,700 meters of the foundation of the ancient city. The workers excavated the ruins, but the architect has told nothing in his memory. No one around Naples or Rome has never known that this discovery was made. So it was a problem of indifference, not of finding things. Thus, the first true discovery happened not in Pompeii, but in Herculaneum, when in 1711, the French Prince d'Elbeuf, who was a soldier at the order of the Austrian Vice King of Naples, carried an archaeological search by pits on the site of the theater of the city. Herculaneum was 20 meters down, so it was not easy to excavate it open sky. They excavated by pit. After it had been found by chance by local well diggers, pieces of the theaters. This excavation led to the discovery of the ancient building, conserved intact, and inside they found two important statues of marble called the Little and the Great Herculanean Ladies, Grande e Piccola Herculanese, which were soon exported from Naples. It was the Austrian kingdom. And they came to Vienna. They were exposed in the Belvedere of the Prince Eugen of Savoy. And then they moved to Dresden, where they are still now. But the celebrity of the collectors, more than the site of excavation, gave the celebrity, the Piccola and Grande Ercolanese. So it was connected, the statue, with the name of the city. This time, the novel of the discovery spread, remained in the local minds. And once that the kingdom passed from the Austrian kingdom into the hands of the Bourbons of Spain, very soon the new king, who was Charles I of Naples, III of Spain, in 1738 had the excavations of the theater of Herculaneum reopened by the Spanish military engineer Roque Joaquim de Alcubierre, an undertaking followed by many new discoveries, and soon extended to the entire city, and then systematically organized throughout the whole Vesuvian territory and beyond. Thus, the year 1738, is the date usually given to the beginning of the Vesuvian excavation, and in a certain sense to the whole history of archaeology. When you go to a book of history of archaeology, you find that the date 1738, the starting point of archaeology as a modern science. This time, the excavations quickly met a general appreciation of all the learned Europe. Since a few years, the travelers of the Grand Tour had expanded their journeys to Naples, and the news of the Herculaneum discoveries began circulating through the letters. This was the kind of literature topic that at the time was used, les lettres. Then, in November 1739, just 1 year after, the French traveler, one of the first to see the new antiquities, President Charles de Brosse, praised the findings of the objects and above all of the ancient paintings. In some letter to his friends, one of them was the great naturalist Leclerc de Buffon, was one of the people who had this letter. And the letter, there is nothing in the world more singular than to have found an entire city underground. In an Italy which was already rich in collection of statues and coins, wherever every city in Italy had a collection or many collections of antiquities, the real novelty was in fact that the discovery of an entire city which prompted the dream of bringing it back entirely to the light. So Scipione Maffei was the most famous erudite of the time. In his 3 letters from the Marquis Scipione Maffei, 1748, wrote, "Oh, what a great fortune of our days is that not one over another one ancient monument is discovered, but a city." And added, "To the great benefit of the country, the whole of educated Europe will rush to Naples, and by clearing everything out and leaving it in place, the whole city would be an incomparable museum." This idea of the incomparable museum will run over the centuries. It was an easy prophecy. The excellence mark and the international fame of the discovery was ensured by the letter to the Count of Brühl on the discovery of Herculaneum, 1762, by the German Johann Joachim Winckelmann, the most celebrated antiquarian of his days. Luckily, the initial difficulties of the excavation, which were a number, regarding the excavation method, the research, the strategy, the methods of the surveys, were soon resolved by the lucid mind of the Prime Minister Bernardo Tanucci, professor of economics and laws, but also passionate about ancient history and epigraphy. And it's very interesting to see how somebody who was not an antiquarian looked at the antiquity from an historical and also a sociological and economic point of view. It's very interesting. His action resulted even more essential after the King Charles left Naples for Spain in 1759, and he, Tanucci, was tasked as a tutor of the young King Ferdinand to supervise the progress of the excavations, which, in the time, expanded in 1748 to Pompeii and the year next to Stabie. Equally important was then the follow-up, the setting of an academy, the Herculaneum Academy for the publication, the management of the more and more requested visits of the illustrious guests, the issuing of a special legislation for protecting and conserving antiquities. A legislation which in turn inspired in Spain King Charles for the South American Spanish excavation, such as Mochica Chimú in Peru, Palenque in Guatemala, and El Tajín in Veracruz. The natural consequence of the excavation was that the setting up of an Herculaneum museum in the Royal Palace of Portici. Here we see the entrance door. Inaugurated in 1758, it soon became very rich, both in the antiquities from the Vesuvian sites and also from other sites in the kingdom. Thus, it emerged as a focal point of the visit in Naples by the travelers of the Grand Tour. For example, it made a great impression on the young Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who in his famous Travel in Italy, the Italienische Reise, described the museum as the alpha and omega of all the collection of antiquities. During his life, Goethe remained very conservative with a good memory of his Neapolitan and Pompeian days. These are sketches and paintings of he in Pompeii and in Naples. You see the Vesuvius always smoking and so on. In this meantime, despite the royal ban on drawing them, it was forbidden to copy the images of the things in the museum. Only the king and the Academy of Herculaneum had the right to publish them, but the people copied them everywhere. The images of the objects of the museum started circulating in the world of the antiquaries. And as soon as the prints of the books, of the royal books, which were the antiquities of Herculaneum, became available in 1757. And they inspired a new taste, and there was even the production of modern objects imitating the ancient ones. So we see here the Pompeian tripods, made famous by drawings by Giovan Battista Piranesi, and all the neoclassical imitation. All these are objects neoclassical coming from the ancient tripod of Pompeii. Another example is the biscuit of the royal fabric of Capodimonte, which was inspired by the Herculaneum fresco of Chiron and Achilles. You see on the left the original, and down left the right you see the biscuit. Another example, very famous example, is the Cellar of Cupid. It was a fresco from Stabie, which inspired a modern painting, La Marchande d'Amour, by Joseph-Marie Vian, a painting in Rococo taste, which was exhibited in the Salon in Paris in 1763, and was exalted by Denis Diderot as painted by the hands of a resurrected Apelles. It was so great, the emotion for Pompeian things that, and you see how many copies and the elaboration of these celebrated motifs there are. The same happened in other famous cases, like the figurine of the dancing satyrs and maenads from the so-called Cicero's villa in Pompeii, which inspired the service of polychrome porcelain from the Royal Fabrica Ferdinandea. And here again, it was described as painted by the hands of the Graces. And the modern Raphael could not compare with this. So it was another relevant moment in this history was in 1776, the publication of this beautiful book, Campi Flegrei, Observation of the Volcanoes of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies by William Hamilton, the British ambassador in Naples, with a great passion for volcanoes and antiquities. He is still famous today because he succeeded in putting together a large collection of Greek vases. They were called at the time Etruscan vases, figured vases, that he succeeded to sold to the British Museum. It was the first time that the British Museum exhibited terracotta vases and not marbles or so on. Unfortunately, he became more famous in the satiric newspaper of the time for the love story of his second wife, Emma Hart Hamilton, with the British Admiral Horace Nelson. And here we see this beautiful lady painted as a Pompeian Maenad by Elisabeth Vigier-Lebrun. Despite the title of Campi Flegrei connected with Volcano, the book is equally important also as witness of the excavations of Pompeii. Here we have the plate by Pietro Fabris, the excavation of the Temple of Isis. In a period when the real Egypt, we are in 1760, in this period the real Egypt, which was under the Ottoman rule, was still difficult for Europeans to see, to visit. And so this Pompeian temple, it was a real Pompeian, a real Egyptian temple, but of Roman time and in a Roman city, but it was the first time that the atmosphere of an ancient Egyptian sanctuary was revealed. And here we see the reconstruction of a ceremony for Isis from the Voyage Pittoresque of the Abbé de Saint-Non. It was a traveler book, very popular, very famous at the end of the century. And it is the idea of how the ceremonies of Isis were performed. In the spirit of the time, dominated in, the influence of the Isis temple in Pompeii touched also the opera and the scenography of the opera. Here is a memory of the Vesuvius eruption as the smoking volcano in the scene by Carl Friedrich Schinkel, 1791, for the Magic Flute by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Both of them have visited Pompeii and Herculaneum a few years before. And so they have the idea that also the Magic Flute should have something to do with the eruption and the antiquity of Pompeii. In the spirit of the time, dominated in Europe by the early industrial movement, a great attention was paid to the modern manufacturers and how they could be inspired from the antiquity. William Hamilton, the ambassador, granted the British pottery entrepreneur Josiah Wedgwood to copy and to imitate his modern production from the ancient, of his collection. And so we have a famous Etruria service, but another series which is still produced, the white on blue, is inspired by the cameo blue vases of Pompeii. And other examples on the same Pompeian topic were the biscuit figurine, the Dancers of Herculaneum, by the Samuel Worthington Herculaneum pottery, and the products of the French National Porcelain Factory of Sèvres. So there was a taste and everybody followed the mood. Obviously, the Neapolitan court paid a great attention to Pompeii, which was a royal site, private property of the king, paid by the cash of the king. And obviously the court cared to spread the fame through the painters of his court painter, Philip Hackert. And so we have in the description of the Naples kingdom a lot of paintings of Pompeii at the time of the excavations. The Napoleonic period saw the establishment in Naples of a French kingdom. After the French Revolution, there was a revolution in Naples and the establishment of a French kingdom. At first with Joseph Bonaparte, the brother of Napoleon, and after with his general Gioacchino Murat, whose wife, Caroline, was the sister of Napoleon. She became so fond of Pompeii excavations to be nicknamed Madame Pompeii. And under her patronage, the excavations had a very heavy impulse. So to free, she persuaded the husband to use the soldier of the French army to excavate the circuit of Pompeii. It was not to find things, but to understand which was the circuit. And they expropriated in public hand the area of Pompeii. So it was very important because this was the French idea of the time. It's important the objects, but it's important the science. So we have the understanding of the real perimeter of the city and the idea of publishing the result in a scientific way by the French architect François Mazois, who published the Les Ruines de Pompeii. Here you have this, the son of Murat visiting also the theater of Ercolano. But after the revolution and after the French period, we have the Restaurazione, the restoration. And with the restoration and the return of the Bourbons, the British scholar who had been expelled before, they came back. And the most famous of them was William Gell, author of Pompeiana, the topography of edifices and ornaments of Pompeii, published in 1878. This marked the beginning of the British wave of tourism in Pompeii. There is a French writer, Stendhal, who in January 1817 complained more than write, I have been touring the hotels in Naples for 5 hours. There must be from 500 to 600 English working around. It was the beginning of the British tourism. This was the period of the Romantic painters, and the British painters did not miss to depict the picturesque side of Pompeii. So we have here the notebook of the visit to Pompeii in 1819 of the great master Joseph Turner, and the later views of Pompeii by Samuel Palmer, another key figure of the British Romanticism. And here of the same period, one of the most dramatic images of the eruption by John Martin, Destruction of Pompeii, 1822, which is now at the Tate Gallery. You see, oh, this is really dramatic. Whereas is more serene, more tranquil, this image of the consular street in Pompeii by the German Karl Blechen, which is now in Berlin. In this period, one of the most visited sites was the house of the tragic poet. The name came from a mosaic in the house, and which was depicted by the French antiquarian Désiré Raoul Rochette, which was the secretary of the Academy of Fine Letters in Paris. But the house became more popular since in 1834 it was adopted by the English novelist Edward Bulwer-Lytton as the home of Glaucus, the Greek protagonist of his novel, The Last Days of Pompeii. This book, based on a love story between an Athenian guy and Ione, a Pompeian girl of a Christian faith stalked by the Egyptian priest of Isis, started an editorial success case which has lasted for about 2 centuries. As late as the 1990s, the paperback editions, translated in all the main languages of the world, were still being produced at the rate of 200,000, 300,000 copies per year. Many of the characters of this novel became so famous to be adopted by visual artists. Here we have Nydia, the blind flower seller who hopelessly loves Glaucus in a paintings by George Marx, and a sculpture by the American sculptor Randolph Roger, of 1855. The story was adopted also by the theater. Here we have a photograph of the actress Nellie Power as Glaucus, and put on the stage in the Vaudeville Theatre on the Strand in London as The Very Last Days of Pompeii in 1872. So it was more popular than the Bible, perhaps. Quite in the same days of the Bulwer-Lytton novel, another Last Days of Pompeii, representing the people of Pompeii, injured to death by the volcano, was the theme of an enormous painting, is more or less 5 or 7 meters, by the Russian painter Karl Brylov, The Last Days of Pompeii, which is now in the State Museum of St. Petersburg, or Russian Museum, which was painted in 1830. The presence of more and more tourists stimulated local artists to produce little views of the excavation, sold as a souvenir images. There was the big art, and there was the popular production for tourists. A fair level was attained since the 1820s by the so-called Posillipo School, initiated by a good Dutch painter, Anton Smink van Pietlo, but after him, for decades and decades, a group of families of painters, the Carelli, the Fergola, the Whittings, the Gigante, produced in Naples en masse thousands of these little landscapes, the cheapest ones being little stereotyped watercolors images painted à la gouache, and here we have one of the best ones, Giacinto Gigante, the House of the Lerch Fountain. They were very quick produced and sold, and the libraries in Naples were full of this. Near the hotels, there were a lot of librarians selling these images. But we have also, by Fairflow, the 12 views of Pompeii. And for scholars, it's an important source of documentation. Then we have Saverio della Gatta, the portico of the theaters in Pompeii. But look around how the landscape is still clean. It's only countryside. Unfortunately, it is not more the case. And Pompeii was the main site. But even if on a smaller scale, there was also the Herculaneum, even though limited to the picturesque view of the underground theater at the light of torches. Being 20 meters down, Herculaneum was not excavated at open sky for a long time. Only in 19th century it was, or in 20th century it was re-excavated at open sky, and so the visit of the travelers, of the tourists, could be only as the Murasson has done in the beginning of the century. Torches, and there was something fascinating in this idea of going in this kind of catacombs through torch slides. Among the visitors to the excavations, an important role was played by the scholars. And students of architecture and archaeology, many of them based in Rome. In Rome there were a lot of academies, Spain, France, Germany, etc., Prussia. And all the scholars looked at the site as a main case study for Roman art. Among the foreign schools must be remembered the French École des Beaux-Arts, whose final dissertation, spanning for more than a century, the Envoys from Pompeii, the architects of French School of Beaux-Arts, they need to be 3 or 4 years in Rome. And they have to produce a dissertation in which they draw state of art of the excavations and a reconstruction hypothesis. And all the main after they do not all of them did archaeology. Many of them were just a chaussee, they built modern architecture. But the idea of Pompeii as a source of inspiration, they also visited Greece and so on. And so we have that, I visited recently in Paris, and you see the column of the columns of the Metropolitana of the railway, urban railway. there are these Corinthian columns in iron, which are evocated by the ancient architecture. So there is this idea of the classicism through the modern architecture. This is and we have done, this is an exhibition that we have done, Pompeii through the envoys, but after the École des Beaux-Arts had produced many others exhibitions of the influence of the ancient classic sites in modern architecture through the envoys of these scholars. These studies inspired also the wildest visitors of Pompeii the wish to realize true modern reconstruction of the ancient houses. The most famous examples of the 19th century was the so-called Pompeianum in Aschaffenburg on the Main, built in Germany in 1841 for Prince Louis of Bavaria as an imitation of the house of the Dioscuri in Pompeii, which was provided with copies of ancient paintings, sculptures, objects from Herculaneum and Pompeii, and with the garden full of Mediterranean trees. Whereas in Paris, Prince Jérôme Napoléon requested the architect Alfred Normand, an old Pompeian scholar in Rome, and Michel Rougevin to build for him in 1854-59 a Maison Pompéienne, ou Villa Diomède, in Avenue Montaigne, which unfortunately has been lost by a fire. But we have the image of these Pompeian modern houses. Sometimes the excavation of Pompeii were used also the background of some social message, like these workers excavating Pompeii, 1865, by the French painter Édouard Saint, evoking the new role that the propaganda of the new Italian government assigned to the women. The women should work as the men, not scholar, but they are equal in providing a salary for the families and so on. And these beautiful ladies, seen as a classical status. Well, don't worry. Sorry, I don't know what. No. Sorry. Very well. Pompeii inspired also sculptures, such as the French Hippolyte Moulin, Trouvailles à Pompeii, 1863, evidently inspired by the figure of the dancing faun from the homonymous house, or the Italian Achille d'Orso, the Parasites, 1877, we preferred to show the distasteful side of a society in decadence. You see, Pompeii was seen as the triumph of the Roman Empire, but also as we see other examples of this. At the middle of the century, photography debuts in Pompeii. Here we have a picture by the Francis Fritt and Company Photograph in Pompeii, a company which was established in the middle of the century, and increasing tourism will attract in Pompeii many other professional photographs in an unfair competition with the last painters of gouache. They could not compete photography with painters because of the rapid progress of the new technique. And so we have a lot of new photographer of the second half of the 19th century photographing Pompeii. And here on the right, we have the photography of Garibaldi in Pompeii. He was invited to visit the excavation and was photographed. But with the Garibaldi expedition, Pompeii entered in the new Italian kingdom. A new director of proved liberal spirits was named Giuseppe Fiorelli. He will change the organization of the excavations. It wasn't anymore a royal site, it became a national site paid by the government and with a ticket, which was the new introduction. But the most famous of this innovation was the technique for casting the bodies of the dead inhabitants of Pompeii. And all of us, we know the these casts of bodies, which are the most impressive evidence of the death in Pompeii. Just while Fiorelli was superintendent of Pompeii, arrived in Pompeii the famous Dutch-English painter Lawrence Alma-Tadema. He had a profound impact on the vision of the antiquities in UK. His Pompeii was elegant, cultivated, exact, well suited to the tastes of the English upper class. His care for details in the painting, you will see here the Pompeii of Alma-Tadema. His care for details will inspire English manufacturers to produce modern furniture in Pompeian style. So we have Darmanin & Son and Maltese manufacturer producing objects in Pompeian style. He's not the only English painter to cover the market of the Pompeian themes. One of the most successful was John William Woodward, sometimes less attentive than Alma-Tadema to the historical coherence. So, by instance, we see that these Pompeian girls use Greek vases, red-figured vases of 5th century before, but no matter. The importance was the general taste. And here we have some other picture of Goodyear with these romantic scenes. You see the sculpture is actually the sculpture of someone which is in the Museum of Naples, found in the Temple of Isis. And the other one is the real Via delle Tombe in Pompeii. But Pompeii has become a scenery, a background. And Pompeii sometimes is more like the Capri villas or the Baie villas. It's anymore just the cities, but it becomes the entire scenery of the Roman villas on the sea. In the last decade of the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century, an Italian painter, Ettore Forti, works on the same Pompeian imagery with the genre scène. Here we have a conversation in a house of Pompeii and a fountain scene, and we have yet a greeting. You see a beautiful guy who is greeting a lady on the Via delle Tombe, and then we have an art seller in Pompeii. But also we have is less gentle, the fight of gladiator during a dinner in Pompeii, which is a true invention. The idea that the gladiators fight during but I have seen a modern American series of television which gives the same idea. Today, gladiators are very popular, and so even the triclinia in Pompeii. So, and you have the same scene of the Pompeian death in private houses. Whereas Federico Maldarelli joined the Bower-Lytton world with this Nydia, the flower seller, touching Ione face to understand as beauty. It's a gentle idea, the idea that the blind lady in love with the Glaucus, hopelessly, want to see if the competitor, Ione, is really beautiful. But let's come back to economy. And here we see that this slide shows the rapid growth of the number of visitors in the Naples Museum and in Pompeii at the end of the 19th century, when the figures of the visitors doubled 2 times in the last 20 years of the century, from about 20,000 to 50,000 in Naples Museum and more or less in Pompeii. And it's important also to see how the figures of Naples and Pompeii are similar. It means that people visiting Pompeii after Naples, and it became there was a mirror play between in these figures of tourism. Some pictures here to show which was really the visit. We have old people, ladies, carried by porters in Pompeii, because the visit of an excavation so large became really a stress. Now, there were many reasons behind the success of Pompeii. One was certainly the newspaper. Newspaper, illustrated newspaper, the propaganda which the newspaper was alimented by the government to show that New Italy was capable of doing excavation as the British did or the French did in the colonies and so on, that Italy was an important player on the archaeological stage. But another important element was the new style of the restoration of the ruins by reconstruction. At first it was adopted only for some isolated examples, since Fiorelli had been quite close to the strict theories of the English writer and philosopher John Ruskin, who had been very contrary to the idea of reconstruction in architecture. Then, after Fiorelli, it was adopted more and more systematically, and to the end, the integral reconstruction of the houses of Vetti, excavated in the final decade of the century, and the house of the Golden Amorini Dorati, where not only were the walls and the roof rebuilt, but also the sculptures of the garden were left in place, replanted all the ancient traces, the fountains were refunctionalized by water, just in time to give the setting of the scene of the selling of carpets in the painting of Ettore Forti that we have seen and that we see here. There was the house, and immediately the painter created a painting with the house of the Vetti as a scenery. The new course was launched by the new director of the excavation, Antonio Sogliano, who claimed for Pompeii an artistic and archaeological interest. Archaeological, okay. Artistic is another taste. And to support this market-oriented vision of the restoration, he stated that the mere repositioning of the mosaic, he brought a mosaic which in Bourbon times was picked up from the house of the tragic poet and was brought to the Museum of Naples. And he brought back from the Museum of Naples on the house. And he stated that this simple operation of putting back the mosaic had increased the ticket receipts from 70,000 to 100,000 lire. So the translation between something which is a reconstruction or theoretical philosophy to market in lira is very evident. At the beginning of the 19th century, the ideas of Sogliano were adopted by the new director Vittorio Spinazzola. But the financial impossibility to excavate and restore more houses of Pompeii, an excavation and a restoration done as a reconstruction, was much more cost than just restoring the walls. It cost a lot. And then he had the idea to limit the excavation only to the facade of the houses, just evoking the front of the houses along the Via dell'Abbondanza to give just a linear vision of the city. So you can walk on the street and look, you can imagine that there are houses behind, but he was just a scenery of theater. And these were called the new excavation of Via dell'Abbondanza. In the meantime, Pompeii continued the destination of famous architects as Le Corbusier. In his visit in Pompeii in 1911, drew this fresque intérieur d'une maison, internal frescoes of a house, or famous painters like Picasso, who visited Pompeii with the choreographer and dancer Leonide Massine in 1917. And from the classical imagery, no, not yet, was inspired some themes like the woman running on the beach. Pompeii continued to be a major destination for the cultivated British upper class. And so we have this watercolor by Winston Churchill, who visited Pompeii in 1921. Imagine this aristocracy spread between India and Pompeii and so on. 10 years after, another protagonist of this decades came in visit to Pompeii, the fascism Duce Benito Mussolini. We are in 31. Obviously, the spirit was different. For the fascist, Pompeii was the perfect example of the superior culture of the Roman Empire that he wanted to reconstruct. And to show this in the largest way, not only the fascism promoted large-scale new excavation by the new director Amedeo Maiuri, but he was encouraged to introduce modernity in the excavation to expand the visits. So electric lighting, night visits. So it was pushing tourism through modernity in some way. He was a very good archaeologist and a splendid writer. But you see, the spirit of the time was this one. The 20th century modernity introduced also the symbolism in the vision of Pompeii. So a writer like Pierre Guzman could write Esquet au Jardin de Vénus, 1936, inspired the images of the lares of the domestic altars of Pompeii. In truth, the symbolism appeared already in the painting of Alfred Curson, Un rêve, a dream in the ruins of Pompeii. The shadow, the ghosts of ancient inhabitants come back to visit their houses of 1866, but as a topic which came back in the 30s in the painting of the Dutch artist Karel Willik, the last visitors of Pompeii, which are modern people like ghosts in Pompeii. In the past century, Pompeii has proved to be, past centuries, 20 years ago, has proved to be still an active source of inspiration, even for the most different trends. Here we have some examples. We have Hoffman Pompeii of 59. We have Jones Owens, Pompeian mosaics at the Naples Museum. And we have the surrealist French painter André Masson, this Gradiva. And Gradiva is a title which is quoting a famous Pompeian psychoanalytic case described by Wilhelm Jensen as an analysis of Sigmund Freud. There is a famous tale about a visitor who visits Pompeii, picks a bone of an ancient skeleton, and then it became a nightmare. And is analyzed by Jensen, and then the case of Jensen by Freud. And also the most modern music at a major moment in the concert of the Pink Floyd in Pompeii, at first in 1976, and then in 2016. The earthquake in the region of 1980-81 provoked the return of the fear of an eruption in Campania and Naples. And the Vesuvius was the theme of a famous painting by Andy Warhol. Thence a number of multimedia and traditional reconstructions of ancient eruption have been issued. Because of his completeness, Pompeii provides scenes for the movies, the cinema, peplum, or historic movie, since its beginning. But in the last decades, especially the games in the amphitheater became a common topic. This is the movie The Last Days of Pompeii by Sergio Leone in 1959, and following the success of the movie Gladiator, another Last Days of Pompeii was made by Paul Anderson in 2014. The movie must be quoted also because its image of the eruption has renovated the imagery that has lasted for a couple of centuries. You remember the British painting of eruption here, reproduced as Apocalypse in Pompeii. See Naples and then die, which actualized the fear for the eruption. The theme of the death by the volcanoes in the Vesuvian city was unexpectedly but dramatically renovated in Herculaneum in the spring of 1980. Until this time, it was thought that the inhabitants of Herculaneum somehow had escaped the fury of Vesuvius because during the excavation within the city, very few skeletons had been found up to then. It was then assumed that the inhabitants of Herculaneum had saved themselves by fleeing into the sea on boats. But the opposite truth was undiscovered during the restoration work in the suburban area, when as many as 300 skeletons appeared, crammed one on the top of the other in the cavities of the arched buildings toward the sea, where the boats had been during the dry season were recovered. An overturned boat on the shore revealed that the hope of safety by sea had been dashed by the storm. There was a tsunami with the eruption, and so it was impossible for them to be saved by the ship of Plinius. It was clear by the letter of Pliny the Younger, saying that his uncle could not arrive to Herculaneum. But for many, many years, we have thought that they escaped because there were no skeletons in Herculaneum. In the meantime, the theme of the death continues to dominate Pompeii vision. Thus, the poems of the blogger Adebe de Rango Adem, an Ethiopian-Italian writer, student in the Pennsylvania University, or the music of the rock band Ghosts of Pompeii of the American Joseph Schingler. The same title was adopted in 2012 for his book by the American anthropologist Charles Pellegrino, who applied to Pompeii his experience on the destruction of the Twin Towers. So Pompeii became also the paradigm of some modern tragedy. Modern music comes back in Pompeii from time to time, so the song Pompeii by the rock band Bastille of 2013. Pompeii for kids. We have the Lego Pompeii, constructed by the Australian Ryan McNaught for the Nicholson Museum of Sydney in Australia. And finally, what we have seen before, the Mickey Mouse in Pompeii with the Italian name of Topolino in 2015. To conclude, the myth of Pompeii is based on many different themes, much more extensive and influential than just archaeology or history alone. The combination of sex and death continues to attract despite our naive disdain as archaeologists, and even beyond the often trivial advertising of travel companies, because the topic, the death, comes from the very deep of human psychology. But art, music, and the literature have proven to be fantastic multipliers of the myth. So, to the many people who over the years used to ask me how to replicate the success of Pompeii, it was a common question to somebody who has excavated in Pompeii, I always replied, besides conserving and studying your site, create a literary and artistic prize. And over the years, it will repay your investment, at least in good culture, if not in tickets.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stefano, Professor Stefano De Caro, for bringing us through centuries about how Pompeii was considered. And I think really, as a storyteller, you have been fantastic. So now, because it was a long story, but I think it was very useful to understand the myth of Pompeii and how it developed until Topolino.
It's continuing, I don't know how, but
yeah, it will continue, certainly. So, because yesterday I was looking at one notice saying that they just discovered in Pompeii, during these days, we have a colleague who is German and who is in charge actually of Pompeii after being in charge of Paestum, Zugstriegel, And he said, I discovered the bakery of Pompeii and also the slaves. And now we have a good idea about how slavery existed in Pompeii. So you can see all the time there is some new interpretation of this. This is an archaeological site. And you have, of course, he has a lot to say about the scientific aspect. I think this is for tomorrow. We are having Stefano De Caro at the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage, and he will speak with students and professors and scholars of Bahrain about the aspect of archaeology and what we call preventive archaeology. But I don't want to I want to see if there are questions after such an interesting presentation. Yes, please. Can you give the... لا ما عندناش ما نسمعوكش. اصبر قاعد تعطي لك الميكروفون.
Just wanted to know if tomorrow's lecture is open for people who would be interested in the topic.
For tomorrow?
Yes?
Yes, it's open.
What time is it?
10 o'clock
All
in the
right,
morning. This center was created by Sheikh Hamay Al Khalifa, and it is open to the public all the time, all the week, except the weekend, of course.
All right, thank you.
Any other question? So if there is no question, I want really to express my thanks to Ambassador Excellency for having had this idea. A few months ago, I can say, it's not a secret, we were at Buzabun with Sheikh Hamay, and we discussed how some scholar can come to Bahrain and speak about one of the most visible, there are so many other sites in Italy, but this is the most visible, the most attractive place in this country. And we thought, why not having someone who was working in Paestum, who was working in Herculaneum, and it happened that he's my friend. So I shouldn't hide the fact that I thought this is a good time for Stefano De Caro to come to Bahrain to explain to us all this very interesting development in art, in music, in paintings, and also now in anthropology, how all this subject of Paestum is important also for us in our culture.
It's the mirror of our psychology.
Exactly. So thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Sheikh Hamay Al Khalifa.
Bravo.